two more minutes to let people in, and then we'll get started. Buonasera a tutti. You are all muted, so we cannot talk right now, but welcome everyone. We'll wait one more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we can get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this event organized by PIB and Dante Alighieri Society of Massachusetts. My name is Francesca Seta. I'm here on behalf of PIB. PIB stands for Professionisti Italiani a Boston, or Professional Italian in Boston. We are a network organization of Italians and Italian Americans, and in general, people loving Italian culture, liking Italian culture. The majority of us came from Italy about 10, 15 years ago, but some earlier, some later. So if you don't know us, please feel free to visit our website, piboston.org. So we are very happy to be here today for this event that was supposed to go on last year. Unfortunately, we had to cancel it. So we are really very, very excited that finally we have the chance to present this discussion about women, because tomorrow it's International Women Day, as you may know. It's an international celebration of women around the world. And this celebration has been instituted since the 70s by the United Nations, but the struggle for women rights and equality in the workplace has been a long issue that has been struggled with since beginning of the last century. In fact, this celebration sometimes it's connected to an event that most likely happened in New York City, which was the explosion of a factory where the majority of workers were women. Or some other people say that we remember a strike that was also in New York City by women who were tired of being treated not equally on the workplace and very tough in very tough conditions they were working. So tomorrow it's the official celebration, but of course we wanted to have this celebration today because it's Sunday. And with that, I welcome everyone. And before we get started, I just want to mention that we are going to have our three great panelists today. And at the end of their presentations, so we have the chance to ask questions. So at the end, please feel free to unmute yourself and to ask your question, or to write the question in the chat and we will read it for you, or raise your hand with the raise your hand tool, and then we will give you we will unmute you. So with that, welcome again, and I pass the torch to Chiara Durazzini.
Chiara, you're muted.
I know it took me a little bit of time to get to the right area and unmute myself. So hello everybody, buonasera, buon pomeriggio, anzi a tutti. I'm very, very happy that you are all here today. Yes, as Francesca, and I am Chiara Durazzini of the Dante Alighieri Society of Massachusetts, if you don't know me. Yes, Francesca was right in saying that we were supposed to have this event exactly 1 year ago. And I remember the days in which all the panelists and we were talking about whether we should cancel or not, because COVID, the news of COVID and the danger of COVID has just began to circle. And so at the end we said, we want to be extra safe, let's cancel. Now, the ironicity, l'ironicità, the sadly ironic situation here is that we canceled an event dedicated to women and to women equality because of COVID. But guess who COVID hit the hardest? Women. Because women had, to probably stay home and because their children had to, stop going to school and begin online school. And so, between a father and a mother, more often than not, the mother chose to stay home and take care of the kids. And very often mothers and women lost their jobs. Moreover, being stuck at home, women, lost touch with their extended family, with their, friends, colleagues, because they lost their job. And so this brought to a rise in domestic violence and domestic abuse. So in the last year, unfortunately, the women's situation has declined and has definitely got worse. Now, these days, the world is fighting back. We are trying to get back to normal. We are trying to fight the virus. We are reopening some businesses and especially schools. We are trying to regain a cautious but more regular life. And, we have to consider that very likely women will have an important role in our post-COVID society. Let's consider that globally 70% of health and social service providers are women, most of whom in the lower paid jobs. So with these considerations, I welcome everybody. I want to invite you all to become members of the Dante. As you know, the Dante is a non-profit organization, so we sustain ourselves with your memberships, with your donations. So please feel free to check us out and become members. And now let's turn over the conversation to Luciana, who is another member of the Dante, of the board of the board of directors of the Dante, and she is today our Master of Ceremony.
Grazie, Chiara. Thank you, Chiara. Thank you, everybody. As Chiara mentioned, my name is Luciana Burdi. I'm a member of the Dante. I'm also a member of the Comites. And I'm very, very happy. I was happy when Chiara asked me to be the MC for today. I want to welcome our three estimate speaker, Silvia Bottinelli, professor at Tufts University, Gigliola Staffilani, professor at MIT, and last but definitely not least, il nostro console Federica Sereni. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just introducing Federica before she can introduce herself and then go to the next phase of the session. She was born in Rome. She received a law degree from La Luis University di Roma in 1995. In 2000, she entered her diplomatic career at the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs with a specialization in commercial affairs. Her first assignment, and she was going to mention that too, in a very male-dominated world, was the Directorate General of Sub-Saharan Africa. And from 2002, she was nominated Deputy Chief of Staff of the Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs Margherita Boniver. In 2008, she was assigned to the Italian embassy in Madrid, where she covered the position of head of the political and press office. In 2013, she returned to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Development in Rome. And since August 2018, she began her assignment as General Consul of Italy in Boston, and the jurisdiction is Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. So I want to thank Federica for being here, and I'm letting her go next. Grazie, Federica.
Grazie Luciana, buonasera a tutti. Thank you all for being here. I just want to say a few words, thanking Dante and Pip for organizing this event. As Chiara said, we were hoping last year to have it in person, and it wasn't possible this year. 1 year, down the road, we're still not COVID-free, unfortunately, but we are struggling to reach out to all of you and to maintain as many events as possible. I will later on during the panel describe a little bit of what my experience has been in the diplomatic world, which, as Luciana was saying, is very male-oriented and dominated. Obviously, there is still a long way to go for women. Not only do we still, especially in specific societies, definitely the Italian society, women have the main load in families. If they choose to have families and if they choose to have children, they definitely have, I would say, 80% of the workload at home as well as in the office when they're working. There's the theme of domestic violence. There's themes of gaps in salaries. So there's a very long way to go. I must say, my generation has had it probably much easier than many women that I look up to, but I definitely think that there's still a lot of work to do that we must do and that society must do to actually allow future women, the girls of today, to be fully empowered and to be able to share the same opportunities that men have in the world today. So thank you very much for inviting me, and I will speak further on about my experience in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you. Grazie a tutti.
And now, from Elena Ferrante, my brilliant friends. And this is in Italian, so I hope you'll understand. Le frasi provocatorie di Maria Rosa e l'invito delle sue amiche mi spinsero a ripescare sotto una pila di libri quel paio di opuscoli che me aveva regalato tempo prima Adele. Me li portai in giro nella borsa, li lessi all'aperto, sotto un cielo grigio di fine inverno. Lessi per primo, incuriosita dal titolo, un testo intitolato Sputiamo su Hegel. Lo lessi mentre Elsa dormiva nella carrozzina e Dede, con cappottino, sciarpa e cappello di lana, dialogava a bassa voce col suo pupazzo. Mi colpì ogni frase, ogni parola e soprattutto la sfrontata libertà di pensiero. Sottolineai tantissime frasi con forza, segnai punti esclamativi, freghi verticali. Sputare su Hegel. Sputare sulla cultura degli uomini. Sputare su Marx, su Engels, su Lenin e sul materialismo storico e su Freud e sulla psicoanalisi e l'invidia del pene e sul matrimonio, sulla famiglia e sul nazismo, sullo stalinismo, sul terrorismo e sulla guerra e sulla lotta di classe e sulla dittatura del proletariato e sul socialismo e sul comunismo e sulla trappola dell'uguaglianza e su tutte le manifestazioni della cultura patriarcale e su tutte le forme organizzative. Opporsi alla dispersione delle intelligenze femminili deculturalizzarsi, disaculturalizzarsi a partire dalla maternità, non dare figli a nessuno, sbarazzarsi della dialettica servo-padrone, strapparsi dal cervello l'inferiorità, restituirsi a se stesse, non avere antitesi, muoversi su un altro piano in nome della propria differenza. L'università non libera le donne, ma perfeziona la loro repressione contro la saggezza. Mentre i maschi si danno a imprese spaziali, la vita per le femmine su questo pianeta deve ancora cominciare. La donna è l'altra faccia della terra. La donna è il soggetto imprevisto. Liberarsi della sottomissione, qui, ora, in questo presente. L'autrice di quelle pagine si chiamava Carla Lonzi. Com'è possibile, mi dissi, che una donna sappia pensare così? Ho faticato tanto sui libri, ma li ho subiti, non li ho mai veramente usati, non li ho mai rovesciati contro se stessi. Ecco come si pensa, ecco come si pensa contro. And now I will present our first speaker. She is my compaesana, Silvia Bottinelli. I will read her short biography because she shortened it, not because it's a short biography. So Silvia Bottinelli, a native of Tuscany, is a modern and contemporary art historian in the Visual and Material Studies Department at the School of the Museum of Fine Art at Tufts University. She received her PhD from the University of Pisa. She is the author of several books and publications on the 20th century Italian art, including the recent double-edged comforts, Domestic Life in Modern Italian Art and Visual Culture, published by McGill Queen's University Press, which analyzes the representation of the domestic sphere in Italian art and visual culture from the 1940s to the 1970s. And this is the beautiful, beautiful book just came out. I'm halfway through. Very interesting and beautiful. Grazie e a te la parola, Silvia. Illustraci Carla Lonzi e il femminismo italiano.
Grazie Chiara. Dunque, la prima domanda da cui voglio partire è appunto chi era Carla Lonzi. Questa, sorry, let's rewind actually. Let me go back and speak in English about this one. Okay, so the first figure that I would like to address is that of Carla Lonzi indeed. Who was this woman that Lenou, the character of Elena Ferrante, My Brilliant Friend, is mentioning in her reflection. Lenou, at that point of the novel, had moved to Florence and had been exposed to autocoscienza groups of consciousness-raising groups through the sister of her husband and so on and so forth. And like many women, she had become exposed to the writings of Carla Lonzi. The character was, but also many real women were during the 1970s. So Carla Lonzi was an art historian and a critic as well as a writer, and she studied under Roberto Longhi at the University of Florence. And she was a well-known critic. She wrote about the Venice Biennales. She spent time in the US, in Minneapolis in particular. She wrote she was participating in radio programs, for example, like La Prodo, that were kind of cultural radio programs. She was a known name. But by the end of the 1960s, she realized that the relationship between critics and artists was too hierarchical. It was just too much based on a power difference that expected the critic to place content and value into the work of the artist. And she refused that. She didn't want to be that authority. She wanted instead to have a more personal and relatable relationship with the artist that she wrote about. So she kind of reviewed with this text, Autoritratto, from 1969, she completely reimagined the way of writing about art. Instead of injecting the art with her own meanings, she decided to have interviews with the artists that she would record through sound recording systems, so very modern way of approaching criticism. And then she recombined all of the answers into a sort of kind of a journaling style without, almost like a flow of consciousness kind of structure. And she titled the work Autoritratto. So, you know, through these relationships, she was seeing herself almost. When she came back from the US in the late 1960s, she started meeting with other women that were rethinking ways of really existing in society. And after her first encounters, she decided that she did not want to write about art anymore. She started to formulate her thesis that she continued to defend in extremely strong ways, that art could not be a form of expression for her, and writing as well. And we'll get more into that in the next few slides. I just wanted here to show you the covers of a couple of books. One is Sputiamo su Hegel, that was mentioned by Ferrante, and then Taci anzi parla, that's her later publication that is almost like a summary of didactic entries and journals that she had written starting in the late 60s and actually early 70s and into the late 70s. Why Sputiamo su Hegel? Because Hegel was somehow like the father of a philosophy that was based on dialectic oppositions, on the thesis and antithesis. And Lonz instead didn't want to have that process of conflict as a source for generating for generating freedom or to obtain forms of liberation. So she refuses Hegel because Hegel affirms that freedom can only be achieved through kind of antithesis with others. She also noticed that, well, Hegel is at the basis of Marxist philosophy, and all of these class struggles had ended up nonetheless marginalizing women. Women were fighting along men for social achievements, and then ended up nonetheless being placed at the margins once certain achievements were reached. And so that's why Sputiamo su Hegel, it was like a way of refusing Hegelian philosophies that were, for her, not sufficient to really guarantee an accomplishment of women. So Carla Lonzi, together with these other amazing women, was then by the early 1970s completely abandoning her art criticism practice, and instead devoted herself to feminism completely. And she was one of the signatories of the Manifesto of Rivolta Femminile, feminist, actually feminine revolt, not feminist, but feminine revolt. This was a manifesto that was published in 1970, and with published I mean that they printed it and started gluing it on the walls of Rome and other cities in Italy, and it was around July in 1970. And what are the core ideas here? One is the principle of autocoscienza, that is, woman, and I'm quoting here from the manifesto, must not be defined in relation to man. This awareness is the foundation of both our struggle and our liberty. So instead of thinking about oppositional terms, right, like thesis and antithesis, man as a thesis and woman as a complementary antithesis, there's a complete removal of the male figure here from the picture, and instead a focusing on women themselves in a process of self-knowledge. And then another principle was that equality was almost a myth for these women. I mean, they were struggling, they were fighting to obtain it, but they understood that it was almost unachievable in the context of mainstream culture. And instead, again, like they opted for a different way of understanding themselves that was focused instead on almost like a form of separation. The other signatories of the manifesto were Elvira Banotti. This was a journalist that was born in Eritrea from an Ethiopian Italian family in 1933. And she studied law. She started working at the Italian Consulate in 1959 in Addis Abeba. And she fought for the rights of children born from Italian fathers and African mothers that were not recognized by the law as Italian citizens. They could actually not be recognized by their Italian fathers. She then moved to Rome and started meeting with these groups of women in the late 1960s. And she also had an experience of violence and forced abortion that led her to study this experience and by collecting oral histories from other women. And she collected all of these stories in this book, La Sfida Femminile from 1971. She was interested then in issues of kind of authority of women over their own bodies. She was interested at the same time in addressing the intersections of patriarchy and racism, something that she experienced in Rome. It was a time in which there were not many African women in Rome, but there was a flow, like a shifting into migration patterns, especially as Italian women were becoming more prominent on the work sphere. That basically they needed, especially upper class women, they ended up hiring migrants for housework. And so she was not a unique case, although of course her story was very specific. She disagreed with Carla Lonzi, indeed, actually. She disagreed about the idea that women can only learn from women. She was very interested instead of also being relationships with men and learning from anyone. So she didn't understand the separation of women and men in such strict terms. And then another participant in this realm of the Rivolta Femminile, Carla Accardi, an artist. So Accardi was, like Lonzi, somebody that participated in the art world and then also contributed to the shaping of feminism in Italy. But the difference was that Carla Accardi really loved to do art. She really identified with being an artist. She enjoyed abstract art. And she enjoyed to really express herself through this medium. So when Carla Lonzi prompted her to leave the art world in order to be a true feminist, she just decided that she would instead stop her friendship with Carla Lonzi and continued to practice her art, and through her art, continue the struggle for women. So this was the debate, right, about art. Can women be truly creative if the language of artistic expression has been defined by male artists across centuries? So that's the core, right, question. If language, both verbal and visual, is something that has developed through time based on the taste, on the values and the meanings that male artists that had, an opportunity because of how patriarchy was structured to actually go to art schools, to be written about, to express their ideas. If where we are now is the result of centuries of kind of male centrality, what we define art right now, is this something that can also express women's ideas and thoughts and sentiments? Well, for Carla Accardi, yes, that was the case. And she wanted to participate in these discourses. And she was very, very much an accomplished artist in mainstream discourses. Carla Lonzi did refuse that thesis, that possibility, and instead completely erased her participation within the art world. And what happened beyond them, right? Like these were not the only women that were interested in these discourses or that participated in the art world. Well, Carla Lonzi was very influential. So the emphasis ended up being on difference more than equality for Italian feminism and Italian art circles as well. Separatism, that's the official term, was predominant. Women artists created a separate system of exhibition spaces, publications, and networks. But the result of that was marginalization. So recent scholarship is reconsidering the work of women artists who remained marginalized in the 1970s. This parallel art world was not considered as relevant as the mainstream art world in which males operated. There was also another school of thought that was that of assimilation. So some women artists participated as minorities in mainstream art systems, though their work was also often ignored by critics, curators, and art historians. And so recent scholarship is also trying to reevaluate their positions and reception. So what did women's art address? There was certainly a landscape for women artists and women art production. They mostly tried to deconstruct aspects like their own identity, issues of domesticity and domestic culture, hence my recent book that Chiara was showing before. They were concerned about discussing their control over their own body, and they were very much interested in language as a form of expression or redefining their own language. So this is a recent, I was mentioning recent scholarship, and this is just one of many recent publications that are concerned with the reevaluation of women's art in the 1970s because of these patterns of marginalization. And it is one of two issues of the Italian journal Palinsesti that is open source, so you don't need to purchase it. You can just go to palinsesti.net and you can download the articles. And these articles are by many of the authorities in the field, including Giovanna Zapperi, Forino, Cristiana Casero, Caterina Iaquinta, Raffaella Perna, and Maria Bremer. And there's another issue that's coming out just this month with contributions by other professors that are specialists in the field. So to end my presentation, I would like to bring things to the present, right? Like we're now rediscovering the work of these women artists from the 70s, but what is the situation now? And what is the situation in the US? Well, in the US and now, gender inequality in the arts still exists. The MFA is now having a show that is still on view until the fall that's titled Women Take the Floor, that exhibits works of women artists from the collections of the museum. And it's interesting to just read a few of the statistics that I'm proposing here for you and that are part of the texts that accompany this show. And I'm just going to read one as a sample. Nearly 46% of visual artists in the United States identify as women, but only 13% of artists represented in major US museum collections are female. So this and many other numbers here can show how really gender equality in the arts and in the art system is still a problem today. Thank you.
Grazie infinite Silvia, grazie ancora, molto interessante, molto educational, ho imparato tantissimo. Adesso passiamo dalle difficoltà delle donne ad essere accettate nel mondo dell'arte al mondo scientifico, and I'm going to be introducing Professor Staffilani. Gigliola Staffilani is the MIT Abby Rockefeller Mohs Professor of Mathematics since 2007. She received their BS equivalent from University of Bologna nel 1989 and the MS and PhD degree from University of Chicago in 1981 and 1995. Following a Szego Assistant Professorship at Stanford, she had faculty appointments at Stanford, Princeton, and Brown universities before joining the MIT Mathematics faculty in 2002. At Stanford, Professor Staffilani received the Harold M. Bacon Memorial Teaching Award in 1997 and was given the Frederick Terman Award for Young Faculty in 1998. She was a member of the Institute of Advanced Study in 1995 and 96, and again in 2003 and 2004. She was a Sloan Fellow between 2000 and 2002, and a Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute of Advanced Studies at Harvard, 2009-2010. In 2013, she became the AMS Fellow and a member of the Massachusetts Academy of Science. Finally, in 2014, she was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Thank you, and I'll let her now take the words. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. And I was hoping that after a year we could actually be in person, but it looks like it will take a little longer. So I'm going to show, I'm going to share a little slideshow here. So I hope that's possible. Let's see. Oops. Okay. Do you see the screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good. So I was hoping to do the slideshow, which worked before. Let's see.
If you click slideshow, right, lì, proprio appena poco su. Ecco, lì.
Here we go. No?
No, nella tabella un pochino più su. Sì, lì vai, continua. Animation,
okay.
Eccolo.
I was doing yesterday and then, but somehow it doesn't happen. I don't know.
Gigliola, vedi sotto, ok, sotto allo schermo c'è, dove c'è il zoom, il percento, c'è quello piccolo schermo, giù, dove c'è scritto notes, comments, sulla destra, non quello, 2 o 3. Vai, continua ad andare a destra? No, l'altra? L'altra.
Okay, thank you.
No, ops, ecco qua.
Do you see? Do you see the screen?
Yes, we do.
Benissimo.
But something disappeared. Okay. Anyway, there was supposed to be something here before. Here we go. So, so I'm going to talk about science, and from what Silvia said, one might believe that there will be much less controversy when we talk about science and role of women, because science is something totally objective and you just need the brain to do it. And somehow this, in particular in the United States, is not an initial condition for the discourse. And I feel that I'm very lucky that I was educated in Italy, where I studied in the Liceo Scientifico before going to the University of Bologna. I graduated in math. And until then, I never really faced what young women face in the United States, unfortunately, because I was never told that because I was a woman, I couldn't do math. And if anything, my math professor in Italy were expecting that women would be even better, because besides having the same brain power, they are actually more careful. So it was really a surprise when I went to the University of Chicago, and I realized, in particular among my peers, so my friend graduate students, that there was this concept that just the brain of women is not as good as that of men. And many of you might have heard a few years ago, there was a huge controversy at Harvard that involved at that time, the president of Harvard, Larry Summers, who in fact in a conference was claiming something along these lines, saying that it was not proved that women could be as good as men. Anyway, so during that conference, one of the people in the audience was a famous professor in biology at MIT, Nancy Hopkins. And Nancy Hopkins stepped out of that conference and happened to talk to a journalist from the Boston Globe, and an article came out of that, and Larry Summers was actually in deep trouble after that. But Nancy Hopkins had been for a very long time a promoter of equality in science, and in fact, in 1994, she, when she was a full professor at MIT, start realizing that what she was feeling at MIT, meaning her offices were small, her lab was smaller, her grant of money was probably smaller than the one of the peer male colleagues. So she started talking to other women in the, very few, I will say, back then in the School of Science professor at MIT. And when they start talking, and she recounts this actually in this fantastic documentary called Picture a Scientist. And I really, if you have the chance, I really recommend you take an hour and a half or so to watch it. So she recounts in this documentary that features her together with this few women at MIT in 1994. They start talking and they start comparing notes, and it turned out that all of them felt the same kind of actually objective feelings, meaning they all had trouble getting a bigger space for the lab, they all had a smaller office, they weren't involved in the government of MIT as a whole. So they went to the Dean of School of Science and then the provost at that time, and I have to both men, in fact, and I have to recognize that they actually decided, being scientists at MIT, that the best way to settle this would be to look at the data. And the data was, in fact, measuring the offices and measuring the labs and so on. And in 1995, this report came out of MIT. This was the first of its kind. It made a big splash in the science world and in academia. And in that report, there were data that were showing, in fact, that what the women in the School of Science were feeling were not just some abstract, thoughts that were not based in data, but actually the data proved that they were being discriminated in those metrics that could be measured. So Nancy Hopkins started talking giving speeches in many universities. It really changed the landscape, actually, of how women were treated, at least in science. Now, to give you a little bit of an idea, remember, this is 1995, so I collected a little bit of data from the internet, actually, and in fact from the National Science Foundation. And so I will show you a few of this data. So in this first slides, what you see is employment status, so scientists and engineers. So I'm talking about STEM, and note that this is 2017. And keep in mind, just from what Chiara said at the beginning, that the situation this year is absolutely terrible. Women have been hit extremely badly by the pandemic, also in the world of academia, and in particular in science, because exactly the reason that Chiara said, there are now articles that in fact prove that the output in terms of research from women this year has been much smaller than the year before, and much smaller than the one on men, which is kind of interesting. And so many other data like that, but the data that I will show you today do not take into account the pandemic disaster. So this is from 2017, and you see here in the two columns there are the women and the men. And what I found interesting are the two different colors of pink and yellow. So the pink is not employed and not looking. So that's bigger than the men, as you can see. And also the yellow, employed part-time. So this makes sense also in terms of the fact that was discussed before, that the women tend to take care of quite a larger percentage of family duties at home. So moving forward, I wanted to talk a little bit about the salary. So in the first column, you see this all occupation. We see the usual salary imbalance between men and women. The next one is about the S&E, means science and engineering occupants in general. Again, you might think that as you go up, maybe in the type of jobs that are more popular nowadays, and as you can tell, there are quite a lot of jobs in science and engineering. So you might think maybe in that context will be more equality. That's not quite true. If you follow down, there is mathematical scientists and physics and so on. And the one where you might see more equality is social scientists. And in fact, not surprising that in the social scientists, among social scientists, the women also represent a larger fraction than the ones in STEM, I would say, engineering and science and engineering. So this is no news to you, but this is still till 2017. I don't think the situation changed at all. In fact, if anything, this particular year in which we are dealing with pandemic is much worse. So what about reasons for being unemployed or in this particular fields of science and engineering? And if you see, of course, in this little slides here, what I found interesting is the one that goes under the name or labeled with a family responsibility. So once again, the purple are the women, the blue are the men, and in the particular bracket of family responsibility, the women, of course, are the ones that more than men are debilitated by this kind of situation. And next, this is about women underrepresented, the minority and disabilities, but I want to concentrate on the women. It looks like we are in a better, much better situation. The first column, which is the one in light blue, is 1997, which is around the time of the report at MIT came about. And it talks about percentage of scientists and engineering in the academic world. So these are probably researchers, professors, and so on. And the good news is that we are improving. In fact, the purple side, which is the purple column, which is the one of 2017, it is almost reaching the 40% versus the 25% in 1997. But although this looks like a very good news, unfortunately, I'm going to show you a couple more tables in which that's not so good. So let's start with degrees, or a little bit in terms of bachelor, master, and doctorate degree. So this is important because these are the people that are going to join then the workforce and the positions of professors and so in the higher education roles. So the first picture on the left, this is about women getting degrees in engineering. And the 1997 is the light blue, 2006 is the darker blue, and 2016 is the green. And also the graph is split into two parts. I'm gonna explain what the two parts are because I was puzzled at the beginning. But the part on the right is the number of women in thousands in the respectively in bachelor, master, and doctorate. And the part on the left are percentage of women that are pursuing this kind of degrees. So as you can see, there is a nice increasing, not terribly so, just by very small percentages in both bachelor, master, and doctorate for engineering. And I see this at MIT, where in fact, in terms of undergraduate, at least, basically it's 50-50. And from MIT, since it's a technical school, most of the people that get out of there have a degree in CS, computer science, and engineering. The next one is computer science, and this is not so good. As you can see, the number actually is decreasing in bachelor, is increasing a little bit in master, but is decreasing in the doctorate. And this is not really a nice trend because computer science is particularly important at the moment, as you know, because many of the jobs, in particular the one now involving artificial intelligence and machine learning, all of that are founded on computer science. And I want to show a couple of more. So the one on the left, this is about math and statistics. This is the part where I am in most deeply. And again, the trends are not good. You see there are fewer women attaining a bachelor in math and statistics, fewer in a master, and fewer in a doctorate. And I have to say that if we look even in a more granular manner on the statistics, and I don't have a picture of that, but I can tell you in voice that the pure math is extremely small. And a lot of these numbers, which is the 42% and what you see here, is taken up by statistics, which is a very well, it's a place, if you get a degree in statistics nowadays, you get a quite assured job. While in pure math, there are the women getting into pure math, unfortunately, fewer and fewer. And the next picture is physics. We are doing a tiny little bit better in physics in terms of doctorate, but not so well in terms of bachelor and master. So as you can see, since 1997, the numbers have not changed that much, some certainly, but not incredibly so. And the last thing I wanted to spend a few minutes on is this picture. So this picture was a picture released a couple of years ago by a bunch of Academy of Science, Academy of Engineering, Academy of Medicine. And it's a picture of an iceberg. So I found this extremely powerful, and I wanted to explain really what it means. So what are the obstacles that women in science face in attaining the same kind of recognition of men? So let's assume even that we have all the same quality, brain quality, which I think is true, but there has not been a disproof of that. But then why don't we see the same numbers then? And unfortunately, the reason is that there are a lot of different forces that are against women in general. So at the very top of the iceberg are the obvious ones. So the request of sexual favors to advance in whatever role women are, and these are very evident and possibly easier to combat. Like, for example, we all now have sexual harassment training in academia, in companies. There is a lot of emphasis on this. There are various ways of reporting this kind of situations. So they have been addressed. They are more like objective things that we can fight. Then there is, of course, unwanted sexual attention. And this, again, are evident facts. And there are mechanisms that have been put in place. For example, I have known in the last few years several tenure faculty male in various universities, such as Berkeley, Princeton, and other very top-ranked universities that have been fired and from their position, from their tenure position, because they have been found guilty of have been involved in serious sexual harassment. But what's more, which is larger, just like happens in an iceberg, is what's underneath the water, underneath the sea. And these are small, not necessarily very large event, but when you sum a lot of very small events, you end up with a larger one that constantly interfere with the mental space that everybody needs in order to proceed in their research. So unfortunately, these smaller things, like, for example, offensive remarks about the body, offensive sexual teasing, sexual humiliating acts, jokes, lots of jokes that male men usually make in the workplace and so on, are much harder to fight. The type of structures that can be put in place are much harder to put in place because, as I said, it's a small thing. And I think we are dealing much more with what we see in the lower part of this iceberg than on the top. And these are going to be much harder to fight. And I believe that until there is a critical number of women in the various science and engineering position, it's going to be very difficult to have the younger women coming after us to be successful. I believe the situation is much more improved, but if I were to look at what my daughters, who is a senior in high school, had to face in high school compared to what her twin brother had to face, I'm not so optimistic. So hopefully things will change from a point of view of, perspective of everyday life. And we can put in place a lot of programs, a lot of structures and so on, but until we all believe that women have the same capability of men, and we should let them do exactly as much as what men do to get there, we are not going to improve those numbers that I show very much. So I'm going to stop here. I will take questions later.
Grazie Gigliola, grazie infinite, molto interessante. Federica?
So thank you very much. I found both perspectives very, very interesting. Obviously, coming from the public sector, I think the situation is a bit different. So in the diplomatic career in Italy, the only way to access the diplomatic career is a public concorso, so it's a public examination, and so all the candidates are anonymous. No one knows who is writing what, and the only time, and so the first screening is on written exams, and then obviously only those few that pass the written exam actually access the oral examination. So I worked for human resources in my years in Rome, and funny enough, we analyzed access to the diplomatic career that, as many people know, is very male-oriented. It is historically male-oriented until 1968. The diplomatic career was not open to women. So it's only been, not that many years that women have been able to physically access the diplomatic career. This obviously has created a great imbalance between men and women, and I'll come to that specifically later. It's a historical imbalance, so obviously the higher the ambassadors, only 4 women are full-fledged ambassadors out of 24. Full-fledged ambassadors means people that have the rank, not women that are acting as ambassadors, which are obviously many more. But 4 out of 24 gives you a pretty good idea of how male-oriented the career still is. Obviously, this has, as I was saying, a historical reason. It also has a reason in the progression in the diplomatic career. So going back to the examination, we actually examined how many women applied and how many actually passed the examination. And funny enough, when you looked at applications, the percentage of women applying was higher than men. But at the end of the exam, I would say nowadays, and it's a very big percentage, 25 to 30% of the candidates that pass are women. So how come, what happens? We still haven't understood. We discussed and analyzed, maybe one of the reasons is that women are perfectionists, and so they have a harder time in giving, when they have written exams, they will not finish the exam unless they are certain that it has been done properly. So maybe that is a reason. Sometimes they end up not completing the exam because by the time they've finished the whole series of written exams, they do decide that their performance was not perfect, so they prefer to try again. There are many reasons. We still do not really understand why the numbers of women that actually access the career are so limited. My personal experience, I must say, when I was still studying, I was in university, and I spoke with a friend of my parents that was had worked in the diplomatic career, and he seemed to think that he actually told me that the women that joined the service were extremely unbalanced, and it was not a career for women. That I would, if I had intended to pursue that career, I would end up a spinster or lonely. All the most horrible things would happen because it was not a career that he deemed, you know, right for women. And I must say that he was right in the sense that it is a career that is not the easiest for a woman if we consider that a woman has to be the leader of family life. So obviously this has changed in recent years. There are a lot of women that are professionals. They do not want to give up their careers to raise their children. But for those women that do decide to have both a career and children, I do think that the diplomatic career is still a very hard place to work, because obviously you need to shift children around, you need to shift your spouse, you need to find a balance between work and life, which is not always easy in that specific career. So going back to my experience, after I spoke with this colleague who was so negative about my future access to the diplomatic career, I decided that I would seek for myself and see for myself what it was going to be like. So I studied, I passed the exam. When I joined the service, only 5% of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of the diplomats of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, were women. We are now up to 20%, so definitely there has been a significant increase. We do not have, obviously, the difference in salaries because being a public job, the salary depends on the role that you have. But we do have different access to different positions. When I joined the service, certain positions were not considered womanly. I applied for one position and they asked me, I had an interview and they chose me. And then a couple of days later, I got a phone call and they said, "Is it true that you have a son?" And I was like, "Yes." And they said that that specific position was not the right position for a woman, for a mother. And I answered back in a very sarcastic way, saying that I didn't consider having children as a disease that could be passed on to anyone else. But still, they were not willing to put my maternity at risk by having me apply for that specific job. So that was 20 years ago. I must say that 20 years later, the situation has changed significantly. The ministry has tried, not always successfully, but they have tried to change the bias. Sometimes, so let's say a part of the bias is still there. There are certain positions that are still, a new thing for women. For example, in the US, there's, apart from myself, there are 2 other women that are consul generals. It's the first time that there's a woman here in Boston, as all of you know. So there's still, as I said earlier, a long way to go, but there has been progress. From my perspective, I must say that there has been progress. Having said that, it's a very hard job. Especially if you put children in the equation. In my experience specifically, it's not always been, I've never been judged as a woman. I've always, I must say, I've never wanted to be judged as a woman, but I've never been judged as a woman, neither in a positive nor in a negative way. So I've never felt that I could not access certain positions because I was a woman. But when you put children into the equation, then I think that is the real difference between a professional man and a professional woman. Because in our society, as I was saying earlier, I'm not an expert of the US. I was a bit surprised by what Professor Staffilani was saying. I had expected the United States to be much more advanced than Italy in this area. But obviously, when you put children into that into the equation, it is expected, at least in Italy, that the woman is the organizer. As a good friend of mine, she's watching us tonight. Once she told me, she sent me an article, of a French author, saying that women have the load of thinking. They have to plan. It's not always the doing, the organizing, but it's also the thinking of what needs to be organized, of thinking of what children need, of what they, intercepting their different needs, school needs, friendships, and so forth. And it's that planning and thinking that actually becomes time consuming and extremely draining. And it's very seldom that you can share that load with your spouse. Generally, it's the woman that I think traditionally is considered the one that has to do that on top of working. So working becomes some sort of hobby that you do in your spare time. But I find that the situation of women today is a bit of a weird situation in which we've become much freer. We can choose, we can work, we can be professionals, but we haven't lost any of the previous roles. So we have just added load on load on load. And that has made life for women who choose to be mothers as well as professionals extremely challenging. And so that is from my perspective, I think we still have a very long way to go in many sectors as women in the workforce. But the additional difficulty for women who become mothers tends to become a very big challenge. So having said that, I would like to close on a positive note, because I have 3 children myself. Unfortunately, all boys, as many of you know, and I must say I'm not very successful in teaching them a female perspective. They are they're boys, and Italian boys at that. So sorry for the comment, but hopelessly, self-concentrated. But I do hope that for the future, there is space for growth in women. If I had a girl, a daughter, I would definitely tell her, as I have told many of my junior colleagues who come and ask me, so is it possible to actually have it all? Some women still think that they need to find a balance or choose between having a family and having a job. At the end of the day, I think that it is possible to have both. And I tell my junior colleagues that it is possible to have both. It definitely takes a lot of energy, a lot of hard work. But I think that the message for the future is a message of hope. So I think that professors like Silvia and Gigliola, and people, like Chiara and Luciana, they come to show us all that it is possible. And so I think that I want to close on an optimistic note and say that from what I've seen in the last 20 years, a lot of work still needs to be done, but a lot of work has also been accomplished. So I hope that the future generations will have it easier. We definitely had it much easier than our mothers. My mother was a professional. She worked her whole life. and a lot of issues that she had to deal with, I never had to deal with. So I hope that generation after generation, things will definitely improve. And I want to close on this positive note, hoping that you can and you must have it all as a woman. Thank you.
Grazie infinite Federica. Grazie anche a Silvia e Gigliola. Apriamo adesso per, credo che Chiara o Francesca daranno la possibilità a tutti voi, sorry, speaking in Italian, I give you the opportunity to ask questions. So if you want, please, you can write the questions in the chat, or you can just raise your hand, unmute yourself, and ask question to any of our esteemed panelists.
I see that
Judith,
Judith, you had a comment. You wrote, unmute yourself and talk to us.
I don't see anything in the chat, but if nobody has a question, I have a question, maybe for all.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Jude.
So I'm a scientist and I'm a female, as you can see. So I would like to add a few comments. And so I agree and on many points, but I disagree on some points that were presented. So I was a postdoc, so I'm a scientist, and I graduated here in the US, and then I became a postdoc here in the US. And in the US, the postdoc salary is defined by the NIH. So that's totally irrespective of the gender. So the postdoc salary, it doesn't matter if you're a male or female or whatever you define yourself, it's defined by the NIH. And then from a postdoc, I went to industry. So I got a job at a company. And the company was advertising a scientist position with a fixed salary. So again, it didn't matter what gender you are or what you identify yourself with. So the salary is fixed. So I think whatever was presented needs to be taken enough salt. So that's what
I wanted to add that those numbers were for NIF, for a National Science Foundation. So, and maybe you're right, also at MIT, the postdocs are fixed, but salary for professors in private schools are not.
That might be, but for the most of the people for us, so it's NIH defined for in academia.
Yeah, but that's not, and mathematicians have nothing to do with NIH. When you go work in a company as a mathematician, a statistician.
That's what I said. So I was a postdoc for 2 years. So I graduated here in the US, and I was a postdoc here in the US for 2 years. And my salary for that 2 years was defined by NIH. And after that, I applied for an industry job. So I got a job in a company, and my job was advertised with a scientist position with a fixed salary. It didn't matter who filled that position. It happened to be me. But that position was fixed with the salary. So it didn't matter who filled the position, male or female, it happened to be me. They didn't adjust, they didn't lower the salary just because it was me, a female. So
thank you. Thank you, Judy. Do you have to share other things? Or
Yes.
Sure.
The other thing was that I'm from Hungary. And in Hungary, I got an arts degree. It was Russian and Finnish, but my twin sister got a physics degree. And the physics group at the time, it was 1998, 1993. I'm 45. And the physics group was very small. It was only 13 people. And my twin sister and one girl were the only girls in that group. And in Hungary, the admission system is very, very objective. You have to take an exam. They don't even look at your name. And you access certain score. And if you access a certain score, you get admitted. They don't look at your name. They don't know if you're male or female. And if you're above that score, you're admitted. If you're below the score, you're not admitted. And my twin sister and that girl were the only girls who were admitted, and 12 other guys were admitted. So you showed that in engineering and computing, there were like less females. I couldn't care less about engineering. You have to drag me with wild horses into engineering to fill the female gap. So in Hungary, the admission system is extremely objective. They don't look at your name, they only look at your scores. And only my sister and one girl got in and 12 other guys got in. I tried to drag in girls into those areas where there are no girls, just to fill the gap. I don't want to go into engineering. I couldn't care less about engineering, and I'm a scientist.
Thanks, Judith, for your...
Yeah, so I think there is Silvia that raised her hand and Antonella, so maybe we can go with Silvia first.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to demystify the idea of objectivity in any field. Exams are designed by people, and the way that you ask questions, the way that you design the environment in which questions are asked, the way that you're advertising the position, and so on and so forth, can certainly influence the way in which the answers are given. And that it has been proven, for example, in the college admissions mechanism here in the US by the different results in different tests like the ACT and the SAT that tend to, they're both tests that are trying to measure quantitatively the proficiency of students of a certain age, their preparedness for college. But the results, the statistics give different results based on, the gender or the sex, the way that the students identify themselves with, depending if they're the ACT or the SAT. And that's due not necessarily to who's taking the test, but because of the way in which the answers are timed, the way that the answers are presented. I'm just saying this because I would like to demystify the idea that there are objective measures of intelligence, because it seemed to me that the argument there was that women are objectively, less prepared, to enter the sciences. It's a complicated thing, and people in the social sciences will be able to argue that the ways that questions are asked are almost kind of conducive to the kind of answers that you're going to get. Just a little bit to demystify the idea of objectiveness here.
Thank you, Silvia.
I would like to argue that women are not interested in those areas that you're presenting. Yeah. Are you trying to drag women into those areas? Because you couldn't drag me into engineering because I couldn't care less about engineering. So
Judith, go ahead. I have other 3 people that I like to speak. So if you want to be brief, that would be great. So we go to Antonella, and then we go to Linda, and then Thomas. Go, Antonella. You have to unmute yourself. You're muted. Great.
So thank you. This was great. I have to say that I love the comment that the women are perfectionists. I think that that's true, but still, I think that there is some historical bias that do not allow women to go further up in the career. And since tonight we are lucky to have many of you that have a leadership position, I would rather ask each of you to share with us one key of the success. How did you make up to the top to the tower? Because at least where I am now, I see that until a certain level, we are predominantly women, but from there on, it's a predominant male environment. So it's a clear line. And so if you can share.
Gigliola, do you want to take that?
Yes, so I have to say that there are two main things. One, I had amazing mentors who made me feel like I was doing well in what I was doing and I was capable of doing it. And I was very lucky. And this is not something that everybody experiences. If anything, actually the opposite might happen. Second thing is that I really never thought that my career was the goal that I wanted to get to. I really loved to work in math, and again, I was very lucky that I started working in problems that were at the very beginning, and hence I became the expert of that particular area that then was very much recognized by the community. And I was just, because of that, I became the expert. And this is, again, was obviously a combination of the fact that I worked really hard, but also the fact that for some coincidence at that particular time, this type of mathematics was new and interesting. So I'm sad to say that the two reasons why I am where I am are not easily reproducible. Maybe the mentorship is, and I'm really trying to push hard for that.
Thank you, Gigliola. Federica, do you want to augment to this?
I think that in my experience, it's been working hard, harder than my male colleagues. I always feel that apart from myself, all the female colleagues that I have that have been successful work much, much harder than our male colleagues. We have to prove we are better. And we have higher expectations on ourselves, first of all. So I think, yes, we are perfectionists and we have a much higher, let's say, level that we need to reach to feel confident that we're doing the job well. So that's the first thing, working hard. The second is trying to fight what I find is very common in women, and that's feeling that you're an imposter when you reach a certain level. A lot of friends and colleagues that I have a syndrome that a male colleague, funny enough, wrote to me about, and it's apparently a real thing in psychology, and it's called the imposter syndrome. Many women feel that they have reached a certain level, but they don't really deserve it. They're surprised and kind of astonished that they have received certain compliments or that they have achieved certain goals. So I would, in a nutshell, I would say it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of energy, fighting against your own limits, the limits that society puts, but also the limits that you yourself put on your goals. That's my thoughts.
Thank you, Federica. There is someone here that is mentioning another key of success. Silvia, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to certainly, thank you. I just wanted to agree with both Gigliola and Federica, but I would also like to add, we'd like to borrow a principle from a book that concerns a different field, and that is the field of racism. And I just finished to read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And one of the arguments there was that, individuals that make it, that are Black in the case study there, are considered exceptional individuals. As if, all the other people that are Black were not as good and qualified. And that's a trap, I think, right? Like each and every woman is going to be able to reach the highest levels. It's certainly a matter of combinations of luck and hard work and determination and so on and so forth. But I would like to point out that that those women that do not reach high level should not feel like they're not as valid and as exceptional as those that do reach high levels. It's a complicated field. As Gigliola was mentioning, you know, there's lots of pressures that are put on us that are external pressures, sometimes internal psychological pressures. But I just would like to stress that at a societal level, we should not understand women that make it as exceptional women. Everybody, every woman, it will have the potential to reach certain levels, but sometimes not the means to really get there. So, you know, again, like not necessarily about myself, but about the ways that we are dependent on so many things outside of us to be able to succeed.
Thank you, Silvia. We'll go to Linda. Linda Grasso, do you have a question or a comment? Oh, you have to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank you for this lovely, interesting, and stimulating conversation. I am, as you can see from my gray hair, I'm probably a lot older than most of you. I am a lawyer. I'm about this summer, I will turn 73 years old. I am the mother of 2 daughters and the grandmother of 4 daughters. And for reasons beyond my control at the time, I was thrust into a circumstance of having to be the sole bread provider, emotional provider, educational support person, and overall getting it done for my girls. And I did overcome enormous obstacles, but it took an amazing effort, not only on my part, but on the part of my children, to be able to willing to understand the necessity that we all had to live through my family, through my colleagues, through my neighbors, girlfriends. It really did take a village, and we were very, very very lucky and fortunate to achieve the successes, and I consider it a success not just for me, but for my children and my grandchildren. Lots of doors were closed on the way, but somehow I was able to crack them open just a little bit and get through. And I think things have changed a lot, but I do not in any way think that the job is done. And I commend all of you for all your efforts, and I 100% believe in everything that Silvia has been saying about how everything is, the deck is stacked for men, and we will persevere if we keep our perspective and keep working. And one field may not interest us, but another field may, and just because one particular field is closed doesn't mean that another field is open. So please, ladies, keep it going. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. It was very nice of you. Thank you. Thomas Katchel, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Sorry, I think you raised your hand earlier. Do you have a question or a comment? Can you unmute yourself? Oh, Chiara, can you unmute Thomas Katchel? I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right. S-K-A-C-E-L. Okay, here we go. Oh, try again. For a second, you were off. You were off the microphone. Can you do it again? No. Chiara, can you try again? Here we go. Try.
Okay.
Yes.
So I am on my fiance's Zoom. My name is also Chiara.
Oh, sorry. I'm right on. Chiara, okay.
My name is also Chiara. So I graduated recently with a bachelor's and a master's in mathematics from Northeastern University. I have to say, I did one of my very first experiences freshman year was being in the common room of my dorm, and a couple of drunk guys had gotten into our building, and we were all going around sharing our majors, and everyone was business, international affairs, here and there. I say mathematics, and they look at me and they say, "But you're a girl." That's the first thing they said. And, you know, after the fact, I found out they were drunk. I did not know that at the time, and that it kind of must have just burst out. But you saw everyone's eyes, because it was a girls' floor, everyone's eyes just pop open. Like, how could you say that? That's not something you can say. So I never experienced anything like that with my classmates or with my professors. I now work as a business analyst, but my manager is a woman. My colleagues are a lot of women. So, you know, yes, I'm sure there are obstacles for me, and there will be in the future, but it's not just about the individual experience. And you have to consider at large what the general experience for women is in my field or in academia, but even as analysts, there's a lot of discrimination there. But especially private companies, they really try to adjust for all these inequalities, which maybe academia does not. So, yeah.
Grazie, Chiara. Thank you for sharing. I see Joe De Rosa raising his hand, not virtually, but literally. Joe, can you unmute yourself? Chiara, I think, can you unmute Joe De Rosa? Here we go, Joe. Yep.
So I thought I'd give you a male perspective.
Good, thank you.
And I have a daughter who's probably the age of most of you here. And I should say that in defense of women, that she started outsmarting me around the age of 14, at least. At least that's the first time I noticed it. She probably outsmarted me earlier than that, but she went on to get a bachelor's and a PhD from Brown and from Tufts. So I think some of you were associated with those schools. You know, I tuned in because today I'm a writer, and I'm interested in Elena Ferrante, and who isn't? She's such a brilliant writer, and I've been studying her techniques and the like. But I was really in high technology most of my career, so I'll say some things about how things have changed. In the year that I started in engineering school, there were several women in the engineering class. They put them all into my section. So there were maybe 10 women in the entire engineering class of 500 or 1,000, I don't know which. Very, very few women. And it was an obvious, I was in electrical engineering, it was an obvious place for women to be, because they were just so good at what they did and competed so well academically with this. In years past, I've been associated with a company that was associated with MIT, and I worked at MIT for a number of years, and mostly in those later years in software. And I would say that the company that I was with, at least 50% of the engineers were software, and I don't know if engineer is the right word for them, because it's sort of computer scientist orientation, software orientation. And I saw very little discrimination against women in that environment. I saw many managers who were women, and many women who excelled and became vice presidents of the company, etc. I wanted to say something about how do you get up in the hierarchy. I went to business school for a while, and I asked that question one time. And what I found is that as you moved up in a company, not only did the air get rarefied, but the environment got more hostile. It was very difficult for everybody. And if, you know, and statisticians can rig the statistics, but one of the things I faced was that I was competing with men in the upper echelon. So there were more men competing for a position than for that rarefied position. So I was one of hundreds trying to get into a higher position. And it's hard to tell how I succeeded in doing that because there were so many failures along the way. You know, I left and I went into another business for a while and I came back to high technology afterwards. I think mentors are one piece of it. There's another thing. My field of expertise is in the technical areas in complexity science. Complex systems are kind of fashionable these days. The internet is a complex system. It's everything's connected to everything else, and you can't build something on a table anymore and sell it. You have to build it in an environment where there are many other things connected to it. So it's more like biology than it is like old-fashioned science. But there's a principle in economics, an old principle called the invisible hand, which sort of said that there's this, economics goes along like there's this invisible hand that's in charge, and yet there is nobody in charge. It's a collective. So when I think about women in the workplace and women getting ahead in this world, I think it's a collective. It's not like any one of you could be good enough to be whatever it is you want. It requires all the rest of you to believe in that, and for that invisible hand to support the group as a whole. My daughter, because she learned to debate me at an early age, abandoned that, and she's just, she makes her own way in the world. I call her, she's a English major, but I call her a rabble rouser because that's kind of what she's been doing all of these years. I hope some of you are doing that as well. So there was one other thing too about the hope for the future, and that is that I see something with my grandchildren that I don't like, and it's sort of, I think we saw the statistics that said things are getting better for women, but there's something else going on which is a negative, and that is this whole internet world that we live in. And what I see my granddaughters, I have 5 granddaughters, what I see my granddaughters coping with is it's a kind of environment where they're just under attack all the time via all of the internet connections that they have. That's not hopeful. When I was their age and I was acting badly, I didn't have that big an effect. But the people who are acting badly now on the internet have a big effect. And my granddaughters have been devastated by some of the things that they've faced. So that's a negative trend that I don't know how to fix, but it's a technology problem, you know, technology associated with society, that we still are, I think, in the early stages of figuring out who we are and how we are. So I think that's all I had to say. I thank you all for doing this. Unfortunately, I didn't speak Italian well enough. I took Italian lessons, but I couldn't keep up with the Italian translations. But hopefully I'll do better in the future and come back to Dante Alighieri. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. That was very nice. Thank you for your comments. I think we are getting a little bit out of the time. So I want to conclude the event by thanking Francesca Seta del PIB, Chiara Durazzini della Dante Alighieri, our 3 esteemed speakers, Professor Silvia Bottinelli, Professor Gigliola, Staffilani, and Consul General Federica Sereni. I want also to remind everybody that the next Dante event is March 21st at 4 o'clock for the second event of the Momenti Musicali. So thank you to everybody, thank you, and buona festa della donna a tutte.
Buona festa della donna e grazie a tutti di essere venuti. Thank you all for coming.
Grazie Francesca, grazie Chiara, grazie Luciana a tutti.
Thank you all, bye bye.
Ciao.
Alla prossima, ciao.
Arrivederci, ciao ciao.
Ciao, grazie.